All right. I think we'll go ahead and get started then. Carrick in the chat says none. I've done a little bit of .NET MVC, learning some Node and Express right now. Self-taught. That's awesome. I love that. Um, Kind of as a brief intro to everyone who's starting to or continuing to join, I should say. My name is Josh Cirre. I have been uh, being creating within frameworks and JavaScript for probably around 6, 7 years. And I got into Laravel probably close to 3 years ago now, and I haven't looked back in a lot of ways. What I hope to kind of show you by the end of this little event, this little chat, is what the options are out there when it comes to modern PHP, especially if you've ever known PHP or the jokes around PHP is like it's outdated, it's old, but hopefully we'll be able to shift that mindset today. Eric in the chat says, I've never used Laravel or PHP, but I've used Node and Express before also. Perfect. So the way I'm going to kind of approach this is like if you've used Node or Express, or if you've used any kind of maybe a little bit of MVC framework, or you just are have used maybe like some backend as a service stuff like Firebase or Supabase or stuff like that. This whole chat is geared around how does Laravel make stuff like that easier? How does MVC frameworks work as a whole within, what does MVC first stand for? But then also like how do we build things knowing that there's more than just a front end and a back end, and how do those pieces kind of fit together. So we'll get started. Those who don't know me, or if you do know me, but I kind of introduced myself a little bit. My name is Josh Siri. I have been building within Laravel for the past 3 years, and that's kind of like what I've been doing a lot of my content around, whether it's live streaming or YouTube videos, or even like my Twitter at Josh Siri. It's kind of just been centered around I growing up in the JavaScript ecosystem, I didn't know how to build things. If I had a website, I didn't know how to connect it to a database so that I could do the things I wanted to do, whether that was have long-standing uh, queues or jobs where I needed to do a whole bunch of different things, and then all of a sudden it just broke and my application didn't work, or if it was as simple as, having authentication in my website. It seemed to take me a couple days to put it up in JavaScript and in like the ecosystem and frameworks around JavaScript. And I kind of fell into Laravel because I saw that you could build you could have a authenticated setup in a few minutes. And so that's what I'm going to kind of show you today. So we're not even going to touch anything there that's not just plain, almost plain HTML, if you want to say it. Laravel has this syntax called Laravel Blade. And that's kind of like what we're going to get started with today. So we're going to go through this boot camp on laravel.com together. I'll go ahead and kind of share this in the chat. But basically, I want to kind of walk through and kind of give my take on what's happening, as well as like if you haven't used Laravel, why are the reasons why you would want to use Laravel? If you haven't used an MVC framework, why are the reasons you would want to? And then why does Laravel exist today? So the gist of it is Laravel is known as a framework for web artisans. And the one thing that I kind of think through when I'm building things with Laravel, or when I switched to Laravel, was if your goal is to build products, or if you're just like looking to build like a side thing and I just want to get something up as quickly as possible, I think Laravel is a perfect choice. And one of the things that I like to say is you don't really have to know PHP from the get-go. A lot of it is very readable, is very user-friendly if you've used Node or Express, or I know that that Carrick had mentioned that they had used .NET. Like a lot of it's going to seem very familiar. And so, if you do have any questions, be sure to like pop them in the chat, and I'll try to read them as possible. But basically, the premise of it is Laravel is a full stack, batteries included framework. And what that means is a lot of the things that you're going to want to reach for when you are using Node.js or Express or anything like that, even within Express, there's some things that just don't come out of the box. So Express does have like a mailing system, for example, but Express doesn't necessarily have a opinion on what kind of queue system you have or what kind of event system you use. And Laravel, all of that's kind of given to you out of the box. So we're going to be taking a look at Laravel Blade, and just for simplicity's sake, we're going to be using Tailwind CSS as well. So this statement right here is basically Blade is, imagine if HTML had a couple extra things, and we'll kind of see what that syntax looks like. But it's as simple as anything that you are using in PHP, so any kind of like variable or any kind of like loops or for loops or if else statements, all of that can be done in Laravel Blade. So if you've used, it's not going to look really similar to React because React is JSX based. You can use React with Laravel. We're not going to get into that today. But this is basically, and there's some other alternatives called Laravel Livewire, which is basically like almost like React server components for Laravel, if you want to think about it in that way. But we're just going to stick with plain old server rendered PHP and HTML. And it's going to look and feel maybe really similar to Vue if you have used that. Otherwise, it's going to look at just really similar to HTML. And I always like to say that it's very user friendly. It looks like it should look. Sweet. So let's go ahead and dive into it. So we're going to build this application called Chirper. Now, what Chirper is going to do is basically we're going to be able to like build a Twitter clone, if you want to put it that way. And within Chirper, what we're basically going to do is build a full authenticated system to be able to log in, create accounts, log in, and then have a Twitter clone built out for you within, we're going to try to shoot for this next 50 minutes, this next hour. So again, if you have any questions in chat as we go along, I'm not going to try to go too fast, but if you do have any questions, feel free to share them and I'll be able to um, to look at them as best as possible. So yeah, the probably the toughest part is making sure how you have things installed in your local environment. So we're not going to dive into much like this, but if you do um, if you do know Docker, that makes things a lot easier. If you don't and you are on Windows or Mac, there's Laravel Herd, which makes things probably the easiest that I've ever seen. And I can't remember if Windows is released. So that's the great thing. But basically, this allows you to set up like PHP and Laravel all in one application. So this would be my first choice. If you're looking to follow along, then do this right now. If you're not looking to follow along, you're just like, hey, I'm just along for the ride. We're not going to touch too much on how to get it set up on your machine. I would say Laravel Herd makes this a lot easier. This is really new, like we're in the past 8 months to a year. And basically, once you install it, you have PHP set up, you have Nginx and DNS Mesh, all these things that, at least for me, I'm not one to be like, oh, let me, brew install this or node install that. This just makes things a whole lot easier. So I'll kind of post this into the chat as well. But Laravel Herd makes things a lot easier. We're not going to touch too much on the actual how do you install this on your machine. If you are following along with the bootcamp, Laravel Herd or Docker, but we're going to just start with a new Laravel project. And within Laravel Herd, once you install Laravel Herd, let me go ahead and pull up my terminal. Once you install Laravel Herd, here we go. Once you install Laravel Herd, you have everything ready to go. So basically, you can just do Laravel new and whatever else you want to chat. And this is already built out for you. So that's where we're going to start. So Laravel Herd, and then we're going to Laravel new chirper. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to go into my sites file and we'll just do it from here. So Laravel new chirper. And we're going to start with Laravel Breeze. And just as an overview, these starter kits are basically just things that the Laravel community and the Laravel team as a whole have kind of built out. The no starter kit is just going to be bare bones stuff. It's not going to have any authentication or any pages built out for you. The Laravel Breeze is usually what I start 90% of my projects with, and what we're going to be starting Chirper with. It basically just gives you authentication and things like uh, forgotten password, things like login, sign up, all of that's just scaffolded out for you, and a dashboard as well. Laravel Jetstream is kind of one step above that. It gives you things like multi-factor authentication, maybe even Teams-based setup if that's something that you would like. But we're going to do Laravel Breeze. And here's where you kind of have those different options of Vue, React, Livewire. We're going to do Blade. And so this is just going to be very basic, high level overview. We're going to do no dark mode for now. The rest doesn't matter as much because we're just diving into what does Laravel do? How does it look like? We won't. Let's build this out. Now, one of the things that is a lot of people kind of get annoyed at, or maybe like very overwhelmed at when you're first opening up anything that is F MVC or like a full stack batteries included framework, is there's a lot of files, there's a lot of folders, there's a lot of things to look at, and you don't necessarily know where to start. And that's kind of how I was when I first started. Was I'm looking at how long this installer takes, and if I was to open up like a Next.js app or even like an Express app, I just have one file. But that's not the case for a new Laravel project. Within a Laravel project, it's going to give you everything you need, even if you're not actually going to use that stuff within your project. And Laravel 11, which is this new, the fairly recent version of Laravel, kind of cuts that down a little bit. So the folders aren't going to be as big. But if we were to take a look at our, pull this over here, we were to kind of take a look at our folder structure right here. We have a bunch of stuff. And if you are new to MVC frameworks, if you are new to kind of like that full stack batteries included, if you haven't used something like .NET with Blazor or Phoenix framework or Rails, this is going to look a little bit intimidating. But basically, we'll walk through this one by one. The app folder basically is going to give us everything we need when it comes to things that are specific to our application. That's going to be any kind of models that we have. You can see here we already have a user model, and all of this is boilerplate code, but we don't necessarily have to touch it just yet. And we'll kind of walk through, but so don't be too intimidated just yet, or at all, I should say. We have a user model that's already kind of set up for us because we have a authentication scaffold. We have providers, and this basically just says that, okay, anytime this application runs, what is going to happen within this application? And the rest of this folder, we're not going to touch too much. We have a bootstrap folder that basically this is just what kind of uh, programs and packages are running all at once before we start the server. And then we have a bunch of config files as well as our database file, which is where we actually scaffolded out a database.sqlite file. And then the folder that we're going to be spending the majority of our time in is this resources folder. You can see here we have our CSS, which already has Tailwind ready to go. We have our JS, which has this thing called Alpine JS, which is basically like a minified version of Vue. It's just a very simple JavaScript micro framework, if you want to call it that. As well as here's things that are kind of like launching when the application scaffolds. And then our views. And this is 90% of where we're going to be living in today. We have these views, and you can see here that this looks just like HTML because 90% of it is. And then we have these things called Laravel Blade conditional or expressions. We have if, we have auth, else. So it's going to look very similar to just syntax that you might be familiar with. But we'll dive into exactly what all of this stuff looks like, as well as a dashboard file. So before we actually get started into the chirper thing, let's go ahead and let's just npm run dev. So this is going to kickstart the Vite server because we are using Tailwind with Vite. And then we're just going to open up this chirper.test. And this is what it kind of scaffolds all this out because of Laravel Herd. I have these, it gives you these .test folders. So any folder that you have in your site file, you automatically get to be able to have all of this built out. So this is the brand new Laravel application. I haven't touched anything. Let's go ahead and register an account. So if I was to register uh, my email, password, and you can see here, if I don't type in the full confirm password, we automatically have things out of the box like field password field confirmation does not match. So again, the awesome part is like I didn't write any code and we already have this built out of the box. This is what sold me on Laravel when I first started working with it. All of a sudden we have a dashboard just scaffolded out for us and ready to go. Again, no lines of code written. We have a profile page. We have things like update password, delete account. All of this is just given to us out of the box. If you wanted to start building an application, you didn't want to have to worry about authentication. Now you can just do that. If I want to change anything in this, let's say here, I'm going to say, uh, hi. There we go. Let's see. There we go. It's ready. It's ready to rock and roll. So hello everyone, and for those who are new or just joined, we're diving into what does it look like to build a application within Laravel, and why would you choose Laravel when there's so many great options? So we already have this scaffolded. We built that. Let's actually dive into how do we, let's actually dive into what the boot camp actually talks about. So we have this built out. We have everything ready to go. We're going to start with creating chirps. Now, this is where we got into the MVC type of mindset. When you're looking to build out an application within full stack battery included frameworks, and you might have a little bit of experience with this with things like Express, or I know someone mentioned .NET, for example. You're going to have these things called models, migrations, and controllers. And that's kind of like the M and C of the MVC. The V stands for view. So models, view, controllers. Models basically allow you to say, okay, what is in my database and how do I interact? So if we were to take a look at our models folder here, app models, we have a user model already scaffolded out for us. It's just saying things like, okay, I can, in this fillable, I can say, I can set a name, I can set an email, and I can set a password for any user that is entered into my database. This isn't giving the schema. So this is not the migration that actually created the schema in the database. But this is just saying when I'm interacting with my database, I can fill in a name, I can fill in an email, I can fill in a password. Same thing with hidden. This basically just says anytime we're displaying this information to the front end, we should never show password or remember token. And then we have these things called casts in PHP and Laravel. And what this basically says is that these even though it's a date time um, in the database, we can set it as a date time field. We also want to make sure that it's set as a date time array. So that way we're not, it's almost like a type safety system. And we can see the types here as well. This cast is expecting an array. This is an array right here. Okay. Long story short, let's create a new model for a chirp. And what Laravel gives out of the box, and if you haven't worked the full stack batteries included framework, a lot of times you're going to be interacting with the CLI a bit. And Laravel does the same thing. Of course, we can create all these files by hand, but this just makes it easier. So we're going to copy this PHP artisan make model dash MRC chirp. And we'll kind of talk through what this is doing. So if I was to open up a new terminal, we're in our chirper folder, PHP artisan make model MRC chirp. Now this is, we're going to say a migration and then a resource controller. And we'll get into what that looks like, but it's going to create 3 new files for us, a controller, chirp controller. And you can see we just gave it a name chirp, but it automatically creates a chirp controller.php file, as well as this create chirps table. And that's for our database migration. So let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like in the code. So we have a chirp model. You can see this is very bare bones compared to the user one that was scaffolded out. And then let's go ahead and take a look at our create chirps table migration. So app database or database migrations and create chirps table. You can see here this is where our users first created with a string of name, string of email that's unique. And Laravel gives you a lot of these. It's querying system for database is called Eloquent. And I think that's rather fitting because it's very readable when you're looking at this. You can say, oh, yeah, I have this timestamp that's email verified at, and it's nullable. No matter if you've used PHP or not, it looks really readable. Well, let's create a chirps table. You can see here that it's already scaffolded out to create the table of chirps. But then it's given us a table of ID by default and a table with a timestamps. And we can leave these as is because we're going to be, looks like we're going to be creating, okay, it looks like it maybe not won't have us be creating anything else just yet. So we're going to be adding routing for our controllers that are set up. So we won't touch this migration just yet. So we're going to go into our routing, and then we have this web file right here. And you can see here what we kind of have in this web file is if you've never worked with a file-based, usually within modern JavaScript, there's a lot of file-based routing. If you have a pages and then a dashboard, it's that slash dashboard. If you have pages and a welcome, it's that slash welcome. That's not necessarily the same for Laravel, at least this particular Laravel version that we're going to be using. Laravel does have a package that gives you that. So if you wanted that, that is possible. But what we're going to be doing is we're just saying, okay, anytime we use a GET request, so anytime we try to access the slash, we're going to return a view of welcome, and that's going to be this welcome blade.php. So if I was to say, okay, slash return a view, let's go ahead and create a new one just to show this is how it works. We're going to say hello.blade.php, and we'll just say, hi there. And in our web, we're going to say return view of hello, because we're going to emit the blade.php. So if I was to go back into our Laravel and go into our slash, so the home route, you can see there we have this. Hi there. So our routing is working. Our web route is working. So let's go ahead and modify this like convert that and delete the hello so that we can get started. Okay, so I think the chirp is going to have us, you can see here, it's built in. We have our dashboard. We're logged in. Perfect. Let's go back to the bootcamp. We're basically going to set up chirp controller so that our routing, anytime we access slash chirps, we want to give it the chirp controller. Now, this is going to be a little bit different than we did for the slash and the view of welcome. So we're going to say, okay, anytime we have chirps or go to slash chirps, we want to give it the chirps controller, and we only want the index and store and a middleware of auth and verify. We'll get into what this looks like. But basically, let's go ahead and copy that in. So we need to pull in the chirp controller file. You can see here that that goes at the top. This is kind of really similar to how imports work in JavaScript, for example. And then we're going to just go ahead and save this. And now if we are to visit our slash chirps right here, it should give us an error because we don't have anything set up just yet. Or it's a blank page because we don't have anything set up just yet. So this is going to our chirp controller. So if I was to click into this, and that's option click in my VS Code, but it's in this auth or controllers chirp controller. You can see here that we have, this was the resource controller that we scaffolded out, which has things like an index, create, store. All of these are, well, I would say the standard resources when it comes to a model view controller system. So anytime you wanted to show a specific anytime you want to show a chirp, you're probably going to be in the index, or anytime you want to show all the chirps, you're probably going to be in the index. If you want to show a specific chirp, you're probably going to use this show function. You want to edit, it kind of gives you all of the scaffolded out so that we can just make these changes in this file and have it be automatically linked to this slash chirps route. So that if we were to access slash chirps with a post request, it's going to automatically associate that with our chirp resource controller. Okay, let's get back into the bootcamp real quick. So next, we're going to test a message from the index method of our new chirp controller. So we're going to just return a response that says, hello world. So response. And we can even do this, which is basically, um, oops, can even do return this, which is basically just a type that's saying this index should return a response type. So this is PHP's way of doing types within PHP and within Laravel. So we're saying, okay, this should return a particular response. So if we were to go back and look at our chirps now, we should say, hello world. Perfect. We don't even have to create a blade view or anything. That's just returning a text response. So everything's working as expected. Let's get into it. Okay, so now we're going to update this with the chirps.index and return this particular view. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to return a view. I think this, I can't remember if it's HTTP or no, it's view. Okay, perfect. And then we're going to create a view index.blade. So we're going to go ahead and copy all of this just for time's sake. We're going to create a new view. It's a new file here. That's called chirps.index.blade.php. I believe that's what they call it. Chirps slash. Okay, so in its own folder. So we'll go ahead and do that again. We'll do a new folder of chirps. And in there, we want an index.blade.php. And this is just naming convention. So that way you know, okay, I have this chirps folder, and then there's going to be like an index page, an edit page, a show page, for example, to match our chirp controller, index, create, store, etc. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at what this page looks like now. There we go. So we are in our dashboard. We are authenticated. If I was to log out, because we have, let's just go ahead and try to access chirps. You can see it pushes us back to this login page. Why is that? Well, because we have middleware already set up. So if I was to go back into our web routes, we have this resource, and we can see here that we only want access or allow the user to access the index and store method for now. That's in our model resource controller. But we have this middleware of auth and verified. So if I was to remove this, I would be able to now access chirps, and it should throw an error because we're not logged in, because we're trying to read a name for someone who is not logged in. But that is because we shouldn't be able to access that unless we are logged in. So trying to access it again, chirps brings us back to being logged in. So let's go ahead and log back in. So we are ready to chirp. And we can see here in our chirp index that this is nothing too crazy. This is basically just some buttons and some input errors that are components that have been given to us by Laravel Blade. We can see here in views, components, we have all of these that are kind of just given to us. And that's what the X stands for. It says like this primary button. So X is any component, primary button. It's just some tailwind that's already kind of scaffolded out for us to make this look a little bit nicer. So if I was to go back into the index blade, you can see here we have text area, an input error, as well as a primary button. These are things that we'll get into a little bit, but this is basically just saying this form, anytime we post to it, so anytime a method of post happens on this form, we're going to send it to the route of chirps.store. And this at CSRF is basically just saying we don't have to worry about cores because we're posting this within this, and that at CSRF is Laravel Blade's way of saying this is approved to be sent. So knowing that's all what this stands for and this means, let's go ahead and get going even more. So we're going to do a little bit more scaffolding out of things like navigation menu. So if we were going back into our navigation, we have this navigation link to a dashboard. And we can kind of see this here up here. We have a dashboard navigation link. But if I was to add this, oops, I was to add this in here, you can see here that we're saying that anytime we access this link that directs to chirps.index, or anytime it's active, you want to show, if we were to take a look into this nav link, for example, this component, we're saying anytime it's active, and this is big fire hose, but we're basically just saying, here's, I want to make sure that we understand here's what's happening when all this is going down. This navigation link where it's saying this is colon active refers to a prop and our PHP component. So it's really similar to like how props work in React, for example. This is just saying, okay, we have a prop of active. So anytime when in our PHP, if we send to this component a prop of active, even though it's automatically false, we should change the styling to all of this here on the bottom. So we're now on our chirps. You can see here the blue underline. That's just that prop that's being sent, saying that this link is active because, and back in our navigation, it should only be active if the request is chirps.index. Again, it all seems very readable. And yes, there's a lot going on at once. Basically, just to show you, here's all that PHP, all that Laravel gives you out of the box, and why it's so fun to work with. Because stuff like this, if you wanted to do this, for example, in Node or Express, or even in something like Next.js, it gets a little tricky sometimes. You might have to say, okay, when the route is, or when the URL has slash chirps slash index in the URL, then I'm going to add that class as a variable in my particular component. And doing it all in one file is probably the easiest way. But if you had these components split up, it gets to be a little bit difficult. And within Laravel, stuff like that is just given to you out of the box. We can say, because we're passing this active prop into this nav link component, I want it to be active anytime request is chirps.index. If I was to change this to dashboard, then anytime the dashboard is active, then we have both of them active. So chirps.index. And this naming convention is exactly what we set up in this resource. So we have this chirps, because we have this chirp controller, which is a resource controller. We're saying that anytime it's chirps.index, this will be chirps.create, chirps.store, etc. Okay, so we have this set up. Dashboard chirps, it looks great. We'll go ahead and move forward. We don't need to add it for mobile screens just yet, but we're going to go ahead and get into saving the chirps. So this is saying if we want to access a store function, in this case, is going to be a post request to the chirp route. So slash chirps, if we were to send a post request within like Insomnia or Postman, this is what's going to store, but we're going to post to it within the chirp index, because we have this form with the method of post to hit the route of chirps.store. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy all of this, and I'll kind of walk through it after we do that. So we're going to hit the chirps controller, and in the store, we're going to right here. Oops. Okay, so redirect response, pull that in right here. Again, this is just for types to make sure that you're returning what you expect to be returning. We're just saying that we want to validate the whatever's being posted to this store. So the request, we want to validate that. This is saying the request that comes into the store controller at chirps.store, I want to validate that request, send it to this request variable, validate it, and say that there should be a message. That message should be required, should be a string, should have a max character of 255 limits. And then I want to make sure that I send that request to the user, create a chirp, and then have it be validated. This is really a lot that's going on right here, but it's really awesome at the same time to know actually what Laravel is doing for us right here. It's saying there should be a user associated with the request. Because there is a user, I want to take that user. I want to get the chirps from that user. We'll see how this relationship takes place in a little bit. And then because I know that user, since it's associated with the request, I want to create a new chirp with the validated info. And then we're just going to return a redirect to the route chirps.index. And now this doesn't work because we don't have any chirps or a chirp relationship within the user just yet, but let's go ahead and create that. Okay. So we go to our user model and we need to tell the user model that it should be associated to chirps. Oops. If we go to our user model, you can see here, I'm just going to put it down here. We have this public function chirps. This has many. Again, this is just a type that says this is what should return. Should return has many chirp class. Now, this chirp class is the chirp model. Again, this isn't doing anything in the database just yet because we haven't set up anything in the database for our chirps. But what this is doing is saying I can access this user, the right arrow. So if I was doing user, right arrow, chirps, now all of a sudden I have all of the chirps that are associated with this given user because we have this relationship. So anytime I access a user who, whether that user is logged in or I'm just like, maybe I'm give me the user with name of Josh or name of Carrick or name of Eric, like give me those users. All of a sudden I have that user and their associated chirps. And that again, that's what's happening in our controller where we're storing those chirps. Okay. Last thing in this model for the chirp model is we're assigning it this mass protection. And what this does is basically if we were to go to chirp model and we were to put in this protected fillable, this is just to say, okay, anybody is able to now create chirps as long as we fill in this message. You saw here that's what we have in this user. You can fill in the name, email, password. This is basically just to say that I don't want people to change the ID or the date of when a chirp was created. I just want people to insert a chirp into the database with the message variable or the message parameter. Okay, so we're going to update the migration. And what this means is we're just going to create the chirps in the database so that we can actually store this information. So if we were to go into our create chirps table, again, that's in migrations chirps table. This is just where all the migrations, in this case, telling the database exactly what to create in a more user-friendly way than having to write raw SQL. I'm just going to input this foreign ID. What this basically means is I want this chirps to be associated with the users table. So this is just saying I'm going to put in a user ID column in this chirps table, and I want to be associated with the user ID, and I want it to cascade on delete. What that basically means is if my user was to be deleted, I want to delete that associated chirps in the database as well. Again, Laravel kind of gives you these words out of the box. If you're familiar with databases or if you use something like Prisma or any kind of ORM like that, a lot of times it might be very similar. And that's what we're doing here. We're saying that anytime the user is deleted, let's also delete the chirps. Okay. Next, we have the string of message. So all that's good to go. We should be able to migrate the database. Again, we're working with the we are working with the PHP artisan, which is the CLI command for Laravel. And if we do migrate, that basically is just saying any new migrations in that migrations folder should be run. You can see here that we actually created a new chirps table. So if I was to pull up let me go ahead and pull up the SQLite database real quick. Chirps. Perfect. So this is table plus is basically just to show like the database. So I have the chirps database.sqlite file pulled up here. And we have this new chirps folder. You can see here we have users. Here's a hashed password, and then just additional information. And then we have a bunch of other different tables that Laravel scaffolds out for us, and then our chirps table. So that's been added to the database. So we're good to go. So let's go ahead and test it out. And because we had already set up that store function, everything should work properly. So let's take a look. So go ahead and refresh just to make sure. And I'm Josh, so let's go ahead and say hi there. Okay. User chirps. Okay. Maybe I probably did not save the user model. with chirps. Let's see if I save that now. Let's go back to our chirps. Let's say return must be of type redirect response. Hmm. Make sure that we did that properly. Let's take a look. So this response, yeah, redirect response. Okay, everything looks like it should be fine. Let's see. Chirp controller, redirect response, turn redirect, route chirps ending. That should work fine. Let's see if the chirp got saved properly in the database. So we did have the chirp get saved properly. We'll see what happened with the return direct response. That's Laravel is complaining about the type specifically, or PHP I should say is complaining about the type. Um, it looks like we're returning a redirect response. So I don't know exactly what's happening there. We'll get into it. Uh, Live troubleshooting. Perfect. Okay, so we are tested it out. We have chirps that are ready in the database to show. So let's go ahead and show them. So now we kind of got the store functionality of Model View Controller. We have chirps that are now a new database entry. We can input them. Any user can log in. It's going to be directed or associated to that user. If I see this is the user one that's associated with. If I was to go back into our chirps, if I was to go back into our chirps dashboard, and if I was to log out here and create a new user, for example, we'll just say um, Ian. Perfect. And if I was to create a new chirp, okay. Now the redirect response works. I probably didn't save it properly, but we can see here in the database now, if I was to go back and look at chirps, that we have two, but now it's associated with a particular user. So now I can do something crazy of when I'm showing chirps, I now can say, show me all the chirps. But if we think about this from a practical perspective, now I also know who that chirp belongs to. And that's how we can show these chirps in a practical standpoint as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the bootcamp says. So we're gonna return particular chirps. We're going to return this view of chirps index, but we're going to return it with the user latest get. I'll kind of walk through this as well, but we're basically just modifying this view controller to return a view, but we're going to pass into that view something. We're going to pass into that view this chirps property. And basically what we're saying is this chirps property should contain all of the chirps with the user. This is basically using a join in database talk in MySQL SQLite world, and we're going to get the latest chirps. So basically, get all of them that exist, and then get them. And this is like the ORM version, Laravel's ORM, which is called Eloquent. We're just saying we're interacting with the database, saying give me all the chirps, give me the user column as well, and then just get them all. So let's go ahead and connect users to chirps. Because we connected chirps to users. Remember, we have this user that has chirps. But if I want to say, give me this chirps user, we don't necessarily have that talking to each other in our models. But in our chirp model, what we can do is say public function user. This tells the Laravel application that in my database I have chirps that belong to a user. But whenever I say, hey, if I say chirps user, now all of a sudden I know who this chirp belongs to. If we were to see that chirp, I know that it belongs to Josh or it belongs to Ian or whoever else wrote that chirp. So Let's go ahead and update our view. Again, I'm just going to copy and paste this just for time's sake, just so we can get as much done as possible in the next 10 or so minutes. So I'm just going to add this into our chirp index and kind of walk through exactly what this is doing. But I believe this is, um, okay, it's in this div. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so if we were to take a look at what this looks like now, you can see here that we have chirps displayed. Any chirp that is displayed from a user, and we can just almost leave it at that. Now we have 80% of what Twitter is and what X is built out because it's all displayed here on the page. So if I was to go ahead and create another one, here's another one, folks. And because we're doing a redirect, there are ways to make this so, oh, we're not accessing the page again. But when I click chirp, we're redirecting to this page again, which is then refetching everything else. We have another one because I'm logged in as Ian. It's exactly commented as Ian. If I was to change this in the database, for example, if I was to say, here's another one, folks, changed, I'm saving this in the database, it's going to be reflected when I refresh the page on this change because it's every single time that this page is loaded, it's pulling those change from the database. It is a server rendered full stack framework. But let's see exactly what this is doing in the code itself. You can see here that we have this weird bracket syntax. And this is the crux of Laravel Blade. Because we are passing in our chirp controller this chirps parameter or variable, if you will, that's all of the chirps. Now we have this array of chirps that we need to do something with in the actual view. Well, we have this for each line here in Laravel Blade, which is saying for each chirp. So because we have that chirps parameter, and that this is now PHP, and before we were passing it kind of in this, um, in this format. Now that it's in a Blade format, we have this as a PHP variable. This is an array. If I was to, let's go actually go ahead and we can, I think this should work. I jump chirps. Basically, this is just saying, okay, wrong one. If I was to do this, now this is just Laravel's way and PHP's way of just almost like a console log. Anytime this page is doing, it's breaking everything because it's saying it's dying and dumping that variable. I wanted to show you what chirps actually looks like before we iterate it over an array. You can see here that's a collection. This is just telling Laravel and telling the database. I'll zoom in a little bit. This is a collection of something from the database. And then collection just basically just means it's associated with a model. And then we have items in this array. 0. So this is associated with a chirp. You can see here app slash model slash chirp. And we have all of this information. We have, you know, this information is not necessarily stuff that we necessarily need to work with, but because we have it if we ever need it. You can see here, this is the original. This is kind of like what we're looping through. I have each chirp, and for each chirp, I want to give the chirp message. I need the chirp user ID because each chirp should also have, let's see, has a relations array that's a user. So all of this information is being passed over the server, over the wire when we're loading the page. But because, let's go ahead and remove it, we have this awesome syntax here in Laravel Blade. This is basically saying, okay, every chirp in that chirp index, I want to grab the chirp user name, very easy readable syntax. I want to grab the chirp created at column, which is a date syntax. We can even format that specifically. And then I just want to grab the chirp message. And if I was to say this again and refresh, you can see here that's what we are viewing. We are seeing the user name, the message, and then the date, the created at date. So if I was to say instead of username, let's just say user, because we have that model in our user model and our chirps model that says, okay, a chirp user, then we have things associated with that user. I don't know if you can see this pop up, but basically we have things like chirps created at email. ID. These are all associated with the user because we have that um, in the chirp model. This belongs to user. Now, anything that's associated with that user, we have access to in the Laravel Blade. So now we have these emails instead of names showing. Or if I wanted to do something crazy, let's say instead of chirp user, I want to say, let's do public function. Let's say, uh, hi, and I'll just like return a string of hi. And now this is, this is obviously not something you would normally do, but now I have this chirp, and for every chirp, I want to return the hi there. That's a relationship. So it's not going to work. But this is just showing that anything that we have in that uh, relationship aspect within our model, we now have access to because it is associated to every single chirp that we're looping through. Okay, let's do one more thing before we'll call it quits for today. But basically, one thing I want to get into, and kind of going from, let's go from like a 6, 7 to a 9 in terms of, we're just gonna jump into the deep end real quick. There's the opportunities to edit chirps and delete chirps. We kind of already saw a little bit about that because we kind of know in our resource controller, for example, or if we look into the webs, we have this index and store. Now you can imagine we could also add edits or, you know, I believe it's called destroy. And then in our chirp controller, for example, we could say, in destroy, we're passing in a specific chirp and we're just going to delete that. Okay, that's great. But what else can Laravel do, and why would you choose it to in order to build out a full stack application? And I would say a lot of it comes down to things that are very tricky to do outside of a full stack batteries include framework perspective. So if you haven't worked in Django, if you haven't worked in Rails, if you haven't worked in Laravel, or even .NET, for example, some of this is going to be really tricky within the Node ecosystem within Express, for example. Things like emails, things like communication, things like jobs. And what a job is basically saying, okay, this might take 10 seconds. It might take 2 minutes, but maybe I have 100 of those that need to process. You don't want to blow up your server because you take 2 minutes to process something for each user, and you have 100 users that are trying to do something that takes 2 minutes. All of a sudden, your server is just so slow, it doesn't work. That's exactly what jobs are, and Laravel just gives you out of the box. So we're going to do a notification, and basically what this is saying is that anytime a chirp has been sent, we're going to create a new notification. That notification allows us to basically create an email and send it to someone. If we have email set up, and basically that just means Laravel gives you all the things to set up an email. You just need a server to send it from. Then we'll be good. But basically, let's go ahead and real quick, let's go ahead and create this notification. So we're going to do PHP artisan make notification chirp. Now again, all this is given to us out of the box. So if we were to pull up the new chirp notification, this is basically saying this use queuable, saying that's going to be a job. That means this shouldn't fire all notifications. If 1,000 chirps got created in 1 second, I don't want to have our server send 1,000 emails in that 1 second. Maybe we can queue them up and we'll say send them one after another. And this is just saying what this is going to actually send within that notification. So if we were to take a look at what this looks like, we have this public function chirp. Let's go ahead and add this in or construct. And this is basically just saying within this notification, what should be passed into this every single time. And then let's go ahead and return a new mail message. Have this here. Oops. Let's see. Okay, yeah, we'll add this line. So let's do this. for using your application. Perfect. Pull this in. Leave it is this right here. Okay. Now, um, what we can do is anytime and we're just going to do this for brevity's sake, but basically what you can do within Laravel is you have this option between events and notifications. Basically, event is saying once something happens, let's go ahead and send out this notification. This is a way to make sure that the server doesn't get bogged down. We're going to just do this on the store method. So anytime a new chirp is created, let's send this notification. But the event basically would say, if we were to look into this more further, and if you're still interested, I advise you to dive into this just a little bit more because this is where the fun stuff gets started. But we can say that anytime we're just kind of listening, we're listening to make sure when a chirp is created, then we're going to dispatch this event. And right here is where we're seeing anytime a chirp is created, we're just going to in this chirp created event, then we're going to go ahead and send that new chirp notification. This is where it makes it take the guilt and the blame off of a server, for example. So that way you don't have too much going on all at once. But for right now, let's go ahead and in our chirp controller in the store, let's go ahead and say we're just going to send user notify new chirp. Probably have to do request user notify new chirp. And the chirp should be, let's see, chirp should be validated. Actually, we'll go ahead and say that this is chirp. That way we can have this. Okay. This is all just to say that since we get that chirp when it's created, I want to take the user and tell them, hey, a new chirp has been created. Okay, perfect. And we can go ahead and test this out. And I believe since I have everything kind of set up for this, let me actually pull this up real quick. Bird. Okay, and then my environment. This is just really quick to show how that mailing system works. So basically, here in I'm just going to set it so that it uses the Laravel herd mailing system, so that when we create a new chirp, what should happen now is, let's say, new chirp created, and we should get a new. Here we go. New chirp from Ian. Thank you for using our application. New chirp created. We have this link to go to Chirper. Again, you could see here that this email that we created, as well as the in our new chirp, this is all we had to write in order to send that new email, because we're saying I want this specific subject, I want this greeting, I want this line. Of course, we can customize this even further within Laravel, but Laravel gives you kind of these easily scaffolded, nicely designed emails out of the box, and you don't have to worry too much about that. So that when we had our chirp controller and we're notifying this user with that new chirp notification, now all of a sudden we have things like this that we can do in our application. And you can kind of imagine like what the things you can do in your application of, okay, if someone is subscribed to a particular user, maybe you can have a subscribed column in the user database that says, okay, this user is subscribed to Ian or this user is subscribed to Josh. And now all of a sudden you can send notifications when that person creates a new chirp. And you can see here, this is how a framework like this starts to be very appetizing when you think of it's built for you to build products and you to build products better and faster. Let's just think of what we did. I know we're kind of over hours, so I want to kind of wrap it up real quick, but think about what we did within, 1 hour of setting this up and kind of even less because we talked a little bit in between. But we were able to create a new account, log into that account. We have forget password all set up. We have a dashboard that we can kind of put anything we want here. Let's just even say for now, let's change this up and we'll say how many chirps are created. So if I want to go into the dashboard and we'll say there are, we'll say, uh, say there are this many chirps in the application. And if we want to do that, we could just do auth user chirps, and we could do count. Let's see. Chirps. Okay. I have it set up anyways. Okay, but you can see here how we created this application and within, 1 hour we were able to get this chirp set up where now a new user can log in, they can create and kind of broadcast their own chirp created, and we even set up emails to be able to receive the notification that a chirp was created. And they're specifically registered to a particular user. So you can see here how we can start diving into this further of saying, okay, only Josh can delete Josh's chirps. You can't delete Ian. He can't delete anybody else's. Or if I want to edit them, only Josh can edit them. Or maybe you only want to edit them after a particular hour because we have all that information ready to go. Laravel makes it easy to do that. So yeah, that is all I have for us today. If there are any questions, feel free to jump them and drop them in the chat. But otherwise, we'll go ahead and call it a day. Thank you so much for everyone who joined and who's watching. But yeah, hopefully you'll be able to, if you aren't going to build an application within Laravel, hopefully it kind of gives you an idea of what is out there when it comes to full stack batteries include frameworks and the things that they can provide for you outside of just new things to build, new fun things to build. A lot of times, stuff like this, like a battle tested batteries include framework like Laravel, gives you this stuff to be able to build applications quickly and easily, while also one of the things I love is not is the ecosystem is so in depth. If there's something, it's almost like React, for example. If you want to find a particular integration or particular plugin, there's probably something built within the Laravel ecosystem that matches that. Um, from Eric, I've heard so many people say that before PHP is outdated, not good, or whatever, but I've also heard others say it can be good. You have just demonstrated that it can still be very useful. Well, I appreciate that, Eric. And yes, I think a lot of people's opinions about PHP, and it's probably not even related to Laravel, but it's probably from 10 plus years ago. And a lot of things have changed. I technically wasn't using PHP 10 plus years ago, but there's a lot of things that change when it comes to how you write the language and when it comes to things like Laravel and other opportunities that PHP provides. And I think it shows that one, I don't think that it's as slow as it used to be because speed has improved a lot and servers have improved a lot. So, like, there's even PHP servers written in Go, for example, that are incredibly fast. Laravel has its own deployment. We didn't get to talk about that, but Laravel has its own deployment platform, and there's multiple deployment platforms you can deploy Laravel. But I use for the majority of my projects use Laravel Vapor, which is basically just an easy way to deploy to AWS. So I don't have to worry about, is my server okay to have X many users? Yeah, so I would advise you, if this gave you a little bit of a snippet into why so many people like myself love Laravel and love what you can build with it, even as simple as within 2 minutes you can have that dashboard ready to go. Of course, I broke the dashboard, but if you can have that dashboard ready to go, you can have the users and authentication ready to go. And everything new that you create is automatically linked in to all of that. So you can have chirps associated to users. You can have, if you want to do, if we were saying, hey, let's build this for music, and we wanted to post like what you're listening to, all of that can be associated to the user. And so kind of it allowed me to dive more into databases and dive more into what servers and models and views and controllers actually mean, because it kind of sets it all up for you. Uh, yeah, we'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen. But yeah, thank you so much for everyone. And hopefully you all have a fantastic rest of the day. We'll call it there. And thank you so much for joining.